Hello, and welcome to Connected, the show that connects you to Peterborough and the Kawartha Lakes. My name is Rebecca Ann Bloom, and I am the guest host for this week's episode. And this week, we are talking about Pride, because it is Pride Week in Peterborough. Check it out!
Years before, council, long before I was on council, had designated the signing of petitions to the mayor. Didn't have to go before council. And this request for a petition to declare Gay Pride Day, I think it was simply a day back then, came to my desk. It was actually the day I was leaving for a 2-week holiday down to Campobello Island off the east coast, part of New Brunswick. And I read the petition and I signed it for the proclamation. And I remember handing it to my wonderful assistant Doris as I exited on a Friday afternoon and saying to Doris, "You may hear about this one." And took off. And I was, in those days, Campobello, certainly the place we rented, didn't have internet access. You could go over to Maine and get it, but the cottage itself didn't have internet access. So I heard nothing until I was crossing the border with my daughter into Quebec on the way back. And I turned my BlackBerry on, and there was a string of emails, a few emails anyway, saying, no, we shouldn't be doing this. But why shouldn't we be doing it? And the actual day that the proclamation was read, I had committed to do something else at that time for the city. So one of the deputy mayors, who was Henry Clark, Henry actually read the first proclamation of Gay Pride Day in Peterborough. And there was a parade down George Street. And I went to a park. I think a number of the people who were in the parade were meeting, I think it was in Inverleigh Park later. So after I was finished my other duty, I went over to the park to greet some of them. And I still remember there was this older gentleman there who was reasonably well known in the community. And I didn't think he'd be in a Gay Pride parade, but he was. And there were practically tears in his eyes as he thanked me for that proclamation. And that sure made the whole thing worthwhile. And I gather that day across from City Hall, where Councillor Clark was reading the proclamation, there were a few signs objecting. But I heard later that some of the participants in the parade went and spoke to those people. And there was no great outcry. They were fine with it. And there were, I think, about 400 people marching that day. But there is a rather amusing side story to all this. After I got back from Campobello, Patty Peters, who wasn't on council at the time, but was very supportive of the gay community out at Trent, she invited me over one afternoon to her backyard where she was having some of the organizers from Trent meeting. And Patty was sort of commandeering this whole thing. And she turned to one of the organizers and said, "Now," she said, "this has to go smoothly, and I don't want to see any nudity." Well, there had been incidents, I guess, in Toronto. And I think the Trent group were as surprised as I was at Patty's insistence there be no nudity. Well, there was no nudity, and it all went smoothly. And, you know, there were a couple of objectors on council. I didn't tell council I was leaving, and I knew that it would be a bit controversial, so I said to Doris. But there were a couple of councillors who opposed it, but not very vocally. And it was the beginning of what maybe should have begun before that. But it was an issue of human rights and human dignity, and people in our community who asked for recognition deserve to have it.
Yeah, I wasn't involved in organizing the first Pride here in Peterborough, but I was in the parade, and if you look at the video on YouTube, you can see me there. I probably looked a little scared, actually. It was pretty intimidating walking down George Street that very first time, and experiencing being so exposed, but also the camaraderie and feeling part of a community for the first time in Peterborough. And so it was exciting but scary, and but that's that's evolved into the parade that we have every year. Sort of part parade, part march, depends on what you're there for. But it's been a great opportunity for people to participate as part of the Pride celebrations. Pride is something different for everyone, but for me, I see it as a celebration of survival and a protest for change. So those two elements are there for me. For a lot of people, it's the first time that they've ever felt safe. So it's a safe space for them to be with other people like them, or just feel safe away from their daily environment. In spite of the fact that there are we have many more rights than we had, say, 50 years ago. People continue to be discriminated against. There's people that live in fear every day. There's people denied living accommodations, work, whatever. There's still a lot that needs to change. So for everyone, the Pride celebrations or the Pride protests are different things, but it's all of those things. It's really an opportunity for the community to come together and learn from each other, and be active and instigate and be catalysts for change in the community. We obviously want Peterborough to be as welcoming as possible to everyone, so it should be that Pride is all about inclusion, and it's a challenge every year to make sure that everybody feels welcome and free to participate. It's within the Pride community that some of those issues exist, but it's also, of course, in the community. So it's an ongoing improvement every year, we hope, for people to feel relaxed and welcome in the community.
As much as Pride is a celebration, and we all love taking part in the really lighthearted, fun events of celebrating the freedoms and privileges we have as 2S LGBTQIA members of the community in this country, it's important to remember that Pride started as a riot, and the institutions that were in place that caused that riot to happen, that still hasn't been resolved. So it's really important that we continue to speak about awareness and advocacy and the protest of Pride in tandem with celebrating everything that we've achieved as a community. I think it's especially important to take the time to celebrate Pride and to participate in activism and advocacy on a college campus, because this is often the first time that folks are able to be free, to be themselves, and to engage in these kind of conversations without fear of reprisal from maybe their home communities or their families. And we're also an institution of learning. And sometimes that also involves unlearning of previous mindsets and oppressive behaviors. So yeah, I think it's especially important in a college campus and to engage our peers in these really important discussions and events. So when we're talking about doing more than just celebrating Pride and about being active toward the injustices that are happening to queer people globally, this is what we're talking about, spreading some awareness about what we can do in terms of advocating and getting involved. Here's what I want to say, that Pride is
really important on the times of the year it falls on the calendar, whether it's your national calendar, your community calendar, but advocacy, activism, and allyship is 365 days a year. And Fleming has departments like the EDI department, and Fleming SAC has tons of advocacy resources. So it's always a good time to get involved. It doesn't have to just be at Pride, and it shouldn't just be at Pride. It's a continual process, and that's what I'd like the community to consider.
Change Starts Here was something that we brainstormed together, but was actually my brainchild. What I'm looking for with Change Start Here is to bring the communities together. Peterborough has a lot of really tight-knit communities, but they're not necessarily brought together by anything beyond our different forms of oppression that we face, usually like through class or through like poor medicalization or through housing. We're affected by a lot of the same systemic issues, but we don't have a lot of the solidarity or understanding about each other's, what we're going through in order to really come together. So that's kind of the goal here, is to start a conversation around solidarity and what it looks like to speak to our oppression, but also other people's oppression, in connecting them to the same systems. So it's really mixed, right? We have a lot of resources that aren't very well advertised. So connecting people to those is a job in and of itself. I think the attitude in Peterborough, the culture here, is really regressive, is really trying to fight against these progressive changes towards like socializing medicine, socializing healthcare, housing, for instance, is a big issue in this town. And a number of people have some really personal issues with unhoused people, and it doesn't affect them, but yet they take it personally. Our city council, for instance, is split on that as well. There needs to be a very big cultural shift, I believe, in our town towards a greater understanding and a greater empathy that isn't there yet. So we're hoping to, in that bringing everyone together, we can, begin this movement towards something a lot more progressive. So Peterborough Pride prides itself on its community involvement. All of our Pride events are community-sponsored events. So a community member can pitch an idea, we may be able to fund it, we may be able to find you a location, and then you're free to go. We thrive on that. So we are always looking for more volunteers, more event planners and organizers. We really like to involve the community as much as we can. So at every point of the way, we are always reaching out and being like, hey, who's got what idea? Let's put it on, let's do it.
If you'd like to get in touch with us about a story idea or an upcoming event, you can reach us at connectedkawartha@yourtv.tv. Or you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at YourTV PTBO.